I never thought I'd be telling this story publicly. For years, it lived in the shadows of shame and disbelief. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have been so blind? But today, I'm sharing it because I know someone out there needs to hear that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. The day I discovered my husband Jason had emptied our joint account of $47,000, I felt my world collapse. 10 years of marriage, countless promises, and endless reassurances about our financial future, all suddenly revealed as elaborate lies. But what Jason didn't know when he drained that account was that I had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. My own separate account didn't just contain savings, it held 10 times what he took. And that was just the beginning of what he didn't know about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, though everyone calls me Becca. For the past 12 years, I've worked as a financial analyst at Pacific Northwest Banking in Portland. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent my days analyzing financial patterns for others while missing the suspicious activity happening in my own home. Jason and I met during my final year of college. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely supportive of my career goals. After graduation, we moved to Portland for my job offer, and he quickly found a position in tech sales. Within 3 years, we were married, buying our townhouse in Laurelhurst, and planning for what we thought would be a lifetime together. We should maintain separate accounts for our personal spending, but have a joint account for household expenses, Jason had suggested early in our marriage. That way we both maintain some financial independence. It seemed reasonable at the time, modern even. Each month, we'd transfer an agreed amount into the joint account to cover mortgage, utilities, groceries, and our modest vacation fund. The arrangement worked smoothly for years, with occasional adjustments as our careers advanced. What I didn't question was why Jason was so insistent on keeping the amounts we transferred into the joint account fixed, even as his income supposedly grew. "It's better to live below our means," he'd explain whenever I suggested we increase our contributions proportionally to our raises. "We'll thank ourselves later." I agreed with the philosophy. Financial prudence was part of what had drawn us together. So when Jason claimed his company was restructuring, causing his commissions to temporarily drop, I didn't hesitate to cover more of our expenses. "It's just until things stabilize," he assured me, squeezing my hand across our dining table. "The company's going through a transition period. You know how sales can be, feast or famine." For 8 months, I contributed extra to our joint account, sometimes dipping into my personal savings to help maintain our lifestyle. Jason was grateful, promising to make it up to me. Meanwhile, I continued building my career at the bank, earning promotions and quietly investing my bonuses in my personal account rather than bringing them into our joint finances. Something Jason never questioned, perhaps because he assumed I was spending it all. The morning everything changed was deceptively ordinary. It was a Wednesday in October, the kind of crisp fall day that makes Portland feel magical. Jason had left early for a 3-day sales conference in Seattle, his 4th trip north in 2 months. I was preparing for a client meeting when my phone buzzed with an automated alert from our joint account. Balance below minimum threshold. Current balance, $253.87. That couldn't be right. We'd had over $47,000 in that account the previous evening, money earmarked for property taxes, insurance, and the kitchen renovation we'd been planning. I immediately logged into our online banking portal, expecting to find a technical error. Instead, I found a single transaction from 6:42 that morning. Transfer to external account, $47,000. My hands trembled as I called the bank's customer service line, bypassing the automated system using my employee credentials. The transfer was authorized using the correct password and authentication code, Ms. Mitchell, explained Mark, one of our senior service representatives. It was sent to an account at First Citizens Bank in Tacoma. The name on the receiving account is Jason Mitchell. Tacoma? I repeated, confusion mounting. Jason had never mentioned having an account in Tacoma. We had no connections there, no family, no friends, no business interests. At least none that I knew about. Can you see when this account was opened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't have access to their banking records, but our system shows we've processed 8 previous transfers to this same account over the past year, ranging from $3,000 to $12,000 each. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 8 previous transfers? Over a year? While I was adding extra to our joint account because Jason claimed his income had decreased, he had been systematically moving money out. Thank you, Mark, I managed to say. Please flag this account for no further outgoing transfers without in-person verification. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, the implications washing over me in waves. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time decision made in panic or desperation. The pattern of transfers revealed calculation, planning, intention. My analytical mind, the same one that had earned me recognition at work, began cataloging inconsistencies. Jason's increasingly frequent trips to Seattle, yet the minimal mileage on his car. His new habit of taking calls in the backyard rather than in our home office. The way he'd check my schedule meticulously, almost as if ensuring I wouldn't have unexpected free time. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and navigated to our cell phone account, which I managed since it was under my name. I pulled up Jason's call records for the past 6 months. The pattern was immediately apparent. Dozens of calls to and from the same number with a Tacoma area code, often late at night or during his supposed business trips, calls that sometimes lasted over an hour. I could have called him immediately, demanded explanations, thrown accusations. But something, perhaps self-preservation, perhaps the analyst in me needing complete information, held me back. If Jason had been calculated enough to build this deception over years, confronting him without understanding its full scope would only push him to cover his tracks more thoroughly. Instead, I called my boss, explained I had an urgent family situation, and took the rest of the day off. Then I drove home and began a systematic search of our house for any clues to what Jason had been hiding. In our home office, behind Jason's collection of business books, I found a folder containing documents for a safe deposit box at First Citizens Bank in Tacoma, the same bank where he'd transferred our joint funds. The contract date was 3 years earlier, nearly to the day. Tucked into the folder was a receipt for a $4,200 payment to Cascade Heights Preparatory School in Tacoma. The student name listed Ethan Mitchell, the parent names Jason and Vanessa Mitchell. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. Ethan Mitchell, a child I'd never heard of. Vanessa Mitchell, a woman wearing my husband's name, receiving my husband's money, raising what appeared to be my husband's son. I sat on the office floor, receipt in hand, trying to process this revelation. Jason and I had delayed having children because of his insistence that we weren't financially ready. We need more security first, he'd repeated over the years, despite my growing desire for a family. Meanwhile, he had already established another family elsewhere. Questions flooded my mind. How old was Ethan? How long had Jason known Vanessa? Was our entire marriage a facade? And perhaps most pressingly, what was Jason planning now that he had emptied our joint account? I needed answers, but I also needed to protect myself. If Jason had been capable of maintaining such an enormous deception, I couldn't predict what else he might do once he realized I knew. I needed professional help from someone who could navigate these waters more objectively than I could in my state of shock. With the folder tucked securely in my bag, I left our house and drove to the one place I knew I could think clearly. Rainy Day Brew, a quiet coffee shop near the river where I often worked on complex financial analyses away from office distractions. As I sat in a corner booth, nursing an Americano and trying to control my racing thoughts, I made two decisions that would ultimately change everything. First, I would not confront Jason immediately. I would gather information methodically until I understood exactly what I was facing. Second, I would not face this alone. I pulled out my phone and called the one person whose discretion and expertise I trusted implicitly. Daniel Kim, a senior financial advisor at my bank who had mentored me since I first joined the company. Within an hour, he was sitting across from me in the coffee shop, his expression grave as I laid out what I'd discovered. "Becca," he said finally, after examining the documents I'd found. "This isn't just about a hidden family. This is about financial fraud. He's been systematically diverting shared assets while creating the impression that his income was lower than it actually was. That crosses several legal lines." Daniel's words helped crystallize what I'd been feeling but couldn't fully articulate. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was calculated financial deception. "What's your personal financial situation?" Daniel asked. "Beyond the joint account he's emptied." For the first time since discovering the transfer, I felt a flicker of something beyond shock and hurt. A quiet certainty that had been building over years of careful financial management. "I have my own accounts," I replied. "Accounts Jason knows about but has never had access to. I've been putting most of my bonuses and about 20% of my regular income into investments for years. It's close to $500,000 now." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "So while he was draining your joint account?" "I was building security he didn't know the extent of," I confirmed. "He assumed I spent my bonuses on personal things, clothes, trips with my friends, my MBA classes. He never asked for details, and I never volunteered them." "Smart woman," Daniel nodded approvingly. "That gives us room to maneuver, but we still need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I have a contact, Thomas Rodriguez, former detective, now private investigator. He specializes in financial deception cases. With your permission, I'd like to bring him in." As I nodded agreement, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Conference. Sessions running long. Networking dinner tonight. Miss you." Another lie in what I was beginning to realize was a tapestry of deception stretching back years. I put the phone away without responding, suddenly feeling a strange calm descend. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a methodical determination that felt oddly familiar, the same focused clarity I brought to complex financial analyses at work. Jason had underestimated me professionally for years, viewing my financial expertise as merely a decent income rather than a powerful skill set. Now that same expertise would help me unravel the web he'd woven and protect myself from whatever he was planning next. "Tell Thomas I'd like to meet as soon as possible," I told Daniel, straightening my shoulders. "I need to know everything. Who Vanessa is, how old Ethan is, what Jason's been doing with the money he's been diverting. I need the complete picture." Daniel nodded, already pulling out his phone. "One more thing, Becca. You should talk to a lawyer before Jason returns from his conference. Angela Wilson specializes in cases like this. She'll help ensure you're legally protected while we figure this out." As Daniel made calls, I stared out the coffee shop window at the Willamette River flowing steadily past. Rivers always appear different on the surface than they are beneath. Currents moving in unexpected directions, depths concealing entire ecosystems invisible from shore. For 10 years, I'd been looking at the surface of my marriage, never suspecting the powerful currents moving beneath, pulling us in directions I hadn't chosen or even known existed. Now it was time to dive beneath the surface and see the truth, no matter how cold or dark those waters might be. I met Thomas Rodriguez the following morning at his downtown office. Daniel had explained my situation, so we were able to dive straight into the details. Financial deception in marriages typically follows patterns, Thomas explained, a serious man whose calm demeanor immediately put me at ease. People think they're being clever and unique, but most make the same predictable moves. That makes our job easier. He spread out a timeline on his desk, and we began filling it with everything I could remember. When Jason's business trips increased, when our financial discussions changed, when he became more secretive about his schedule. "Do you have access to his email or any cloud storage accounts?" Thomas asked. I shook my head. Jason's always been private about his devices. Says it's because of client confidentiality. Convenient excuse, Thomas noted. What about tax returns? This was where my financial background proved valuable. I have copies of everything. We file jointly, but I handle the paperwork since I'm more familiar with tax laws. Thomas's expression brightened. That's excellent. Tax documents often reveal inconsistencies that people overlook. For the next 2 hours, we poured over 5 years of tax returns, bank statements, and credit card bills I'd accessed through my banking credentials. Patterns began emerging like constellations from scattered stars. Look at these deductions, I pointed out. Home office expenses for an address I don't recognize. And these healthcare costs, they're not for either of us. I'd have seen those bills. Thomas nodded, making notes. The address is in North Tacoma, likely where Vanessa and Ethan live. The healthcare expenses match what you'd expect for a child around 7 or 8 years old. 8 years old? The timing hit me like a physical blow. Jason and I had been married for 10 years. If Ethan was 8, that meant Jason had been leading this double life nearly from the beginning of our marriage. Thomas must have seen the realization on my face. I know this is difficult, but these documents are telling us an important story. Jason has been maintaining 2 households, yours in Portland and theirs in Tacoma, for years. The financial strain of that explains why he's been moving increasingly large sums from your joint account. But why empty it completely now? I asked. Why risk tipping me off with such an obvious move? Thomas's expression grew serious. That's what concerns me most. Complete liquidation usually indicates a significant change in plans. He may be preparing to leave the country, cut ties entirely, or make some other major move. The implications sent a chill through me. Was Jason planning to disappear? To abandon both families? Or was he planning to fully commit to his Tacoma life and discard our marriage entirely? I need to know more about Vanessa, I said firmly. Does she know about me? Is she complicit in this deception? Or is she another victim? I'll find out, Thomas promised. Give me 48 hours to conduct preliminary surveillance and background checks. In the meantime, I recommend you meet with Angela Wilson to understand your legal options. As I left Thomas's office, I found myself walking along the riverfront, memories flooding back with painful clarity. 6 years ago, Jason had fought against my taking an advanced certification course that would significantly increase my earning potential. It's so much time away from us, he'd argued. And the tuition is steep when we're trying to save. I'd taken the course anyway, paying for it from my personal account. Jason had been distant for weeks afterward, calling it financial recklessness. Now I understood. Every dollar I spent on my advancement was a dollar he couldn't divert to his other family. 2 years ago, when I'd suggested we start trying for a baby, Jason had launched into an elaborate presentation about the cost of raising children, complete with spreadsheets showing we weren't financially prepared. We need at least another 5 years of saving, he'd insisted, showing projected costs that seemed suspiciously inflated. All while he was already paying for his son's private school education in Tacoma. The pattern of manipulation was so clear now that I wondered how I'd missed it. But that was the insidious nature of long-term deception. Each individual moment could be explained away, each questionable decision contextualized. It was only when viewed as a complete tapestry that the deliberate design became unmistakable. By the time I arrived at Angela Wilson's law office that afternoon, my shock had hardened into something more potent, a clear-eyed determination to protect myself and reclaim control of my future. Angela's office occupied the top floor of a renovated historic building downtown. Unlike the sterile, intimidating spaces of many law firms, her environment felt intentionally welcoming, designed to put clients at ease during what were invariably difficult conversations. "Rebecca," she greeted me, extending her hand. "Daniel briefed me on your situation. I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Thank you," I replied, settling into a chair across from her desk. "But I'm less interested in sympathy than in understanding my options." Angela's professional demeanor warmed slightly. "Direct approach. I appreciate that. Let's start with what you need to know immediately. First, do not confront Jason until we have our strategy in place. Second, do not leave your home. That could be construed as abandonment in divorce proceedings. Third, we need to move quickly to protect your assets." For the next hour, Angela outlined the legal landscape I was facing. Oregon's equitable distribution laws meant that marital assets would be divided fairly, but not necessarily equally in a divorce. Jason's systematic diversion of shared funds to support another household constituted financial misconduct that would heavily influence any settlement. "The key is documentation," Angela emphasized. "We need to establish the pattern of deception, the timeline of transfers, and the existence of hidden assets. Thomas's investigation will be crucial for this." "What about Ethan?" I asked. "He's innocent in all this. I don't want to harm a child's financial security even if his parents have made terrible choices." Angela's expression softened. "That's commendable, and it speaks to your character. Legally, Jason has financial responsibilities to his son, regardless of how our proceedings unfold. We can structure things to ensure Ethan's needs are met while still protecting what rightfully belongs to you." As our meeting concluded, Angela handed me a folder of documents to complete and a list of immediate steps to take. "One more thing," she added as I was leaving. "Jason will return from his business trip expecting to find the same trusting wife he left. For now, that's exactly what he should see, while we work behind the scenes to secure your position." The idea of pretending everything was normal felt like swallowing glass, but I understood the strategic necessity. "I can do that," I assured her, though uncertainty must have shown on my face. "Most people can't," Angela acknowledged. "They're too hurt, too angry. They need the emotional release of confrontation. But from everything Daniel has told me about you, you're different. You analyze before you act. That patience will serve you well here." As I drove home, Angela's assessment echoed in my mind. I had always approached problems methodically, whether financial analyses at work or personal challenges. Now that same temperament would help me navigate the most devastating betrayal of my life. Jason would return tomorrow afternoon, expecting to find his life in Portland unchanged, his wife unaware, his deception intact, his control of our narrative unchallenged. He would stride through our front door with practiced concern about his challenging conference, perhaps bring me a small gift as he often did after trips, and seamlessly resume the performance that had constituted our marriage for years. And I would match his performance with one of my own, the loving wife, unaware of the emptied account because I hadn't checked it yet, interested in his conference stories, planning our weekend as if our future together still existed. All while, Thomas investigated the truth of his other life. Angela prepared our legal strategy, and I quietly moved my own assets further from his reach. The game had changed, but Jason didn't know it yet. He still thought he was the only player at the table. He had no idea that I had already seen his cards and was methodically rearranging my own hand. For the first time since discovering the transfer I felt something beyond hurt and shock, a flicker of something almost like power. Jason had underestimated me. That was a mistake he would soon come to regret. Thomas called me the next morning as I was preparing for Jason's return. "We need to meet," he said, his tone conveying urgency. "I found something you should see immediately." 2 hours later, I sat across from Thomas in a private room at the back of Rainy Day Brew. The table between us was covered with photographs, documents, and printed bank statements, the first results of his investigation. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Thomas began, "and I rarely see cases with this level of compartmentalization. Your husband hasn't just been living a double life. He's been living 2 completely separate lives with surgical precision." Thomas pushed forward a series of photographs. The first showed Jason entering a charming 2-story home in a tree-lined Tacoma neighborhood. The second captured him embracing a woman on the front porch, tall, blonde, likely in her mid-30s. The third showed them together with a young boy, Jason's hand resting on his shoulder with obvious paternal pride. "That's Vanessa," Thomas confirmed. "And that's Ethan. He's 8 years old." I studied the images, searching for some emotional reaction within myself. Strangely, what I felt wasn't the jealousy or rage I might have expected, but a detached fascination, as if I were analyzing a case study rather than looking at evidence of my husband's betrayal. "Tell me about them," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Vanessa Cooper Mitchell works as Director of Marketing at Nexus Technologies, the same company where Jason is Sales Director. According to their neighbors, they've been living in that house for nearly 7 years. The mortgage is in both their names. To everyone in their community, they're a normal family. Active in the school PTA, members of the local country club, regular volunteers at community events. "Do they know about me?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. Thomas hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. Based on social media and my conversations with neighbors, Vanessa presents herself as Jason's wife. She wears a wedding ring. They host dinner parties as a married couple. But..." He slid another document across the table, a printout of what appeared to be an email from Jason to Vanessa dated 3 years earlier. "Becca's promotion means more travel opportunities for me," the email read. "Her new position keeps her working late most nights. We should be able to expand our weekday schedule without raising suspicions." My stomach tightened. "She knows." Thomas nodded grimly. "She's not another victim. She's a willing participant in the deception. And there's more." What Thomas revealed next transformed my understanding of the situation entirely. Through financial records and corporate filings, he had discovered that Jason and Vanessa weren't merely colleagues or lovers maintaining a secret household. They were business partners. 6 years ago, they had formed a consulting company, JV, Strategic Partners, which had contracts with numerous tech firms across the Pacific Northwest. The company generates approximately $380,000 annually, Thomas explained, none of which appears in your joint tax filings or financial disclosures. I leaned back, processing this revelation. So, while Jason was telling me his income was decreasing due to company restructuring, he was actually building a highly profitable side business with Vanessa, Thomas confirmed. A business legally structured to hide assets and income. The systematic nature of the deception was breathtaking in its thoroughness. This wasn't a man who had fallen into an affair and then scrambled to cover his tracks. This was years of calculated planning, deliberate financial structuring, and coordinated deception. "There's something else you should know," Thomas added, his expression grave. 3 days ago, JV Strategic Partners received a wire transfer of $650,000 from a client in Vancouver. The very next day, Jason moved that money, along with most of their existing business funds, to an account in the Cayman Islands. And yesterday, he purchased 3 one-way tickets to Grand Cayman, departing next Tuesday, for himself, Vanessa, and Ethan. The implications hit me with stunning clarity. He's planning to disappear, with the money from our joint account and their business. It appears so, Thomas agreed. Based on the timeline, I believe draining your joint account was just one step in a larger exit strategy. He likely assumed you wouldn't notice the missing funds until he was already gone. A cold, analytical calm settled over me. The same mental state I entered when solving particularly complex financial challenges at work. He didn't count on the automatic alert from the bank, or on me having my own resources. Thomas gathered the documents into organized piles. We need to move quickly. I've shared all this with Angela Wilson. She's already preparing emergency filings to freeze the Cayman accounts and prevent Jason from leaving the country with Ethan. What about Vanessa? I asked. She's equally implicated in the financial fraud, Thomas replied. The business structure, the hidden income, the planned disappearance, all of it shows coordination between them. She's not just a girlfriend, she's a conspirator. As I drove home to prepare for Jason's return, I tried to reconcile the man I had married with the person Thomas had revealed. Someone capable of maintaining elaborate fictions across two households, systematically deceiving everyone in his life and planning to abandon both worlds without warning. Had I ever really known him at all? Or had I fallen in love with a carefully constructed persona designed to serve his purposes? I parked in our garage at 3:18 p.m., exactly 17 minutes, before Jason was scheduled to arrive home based on his text message. Inside our townhouse, everything looked exactly as it had the day before. Tastefully decorated, meticulously organized, the physical manifestation of what I had believed was our shared life. Now it all felt like a stage set, props and backdrops for a performance I hadn't known I was part of. I changed into casual clothes, brewed fresh coffee, and positioned myself in our living room with financial reports from work spread across the coffee table. The picture of a wife caught up in her own career, oblivious to her husband's deception. At precisely 3:35 p.m., I heard Jason's key in the lock. I took a deep breath, channeling everything I had learned about financial modeling and risk assessment. This was just another scenario to navigate, another set of variables to manage. I could do this. "Hey, babe," Jason called as he entered, his voice carrying that practiced warmth I had never questioned before. "Something smells good." He appeared, in the doorway, handsome in his business casual attire, a small gift bag dangling from his fingers. His smile, the one that had once made my heart race, now seemed like another data point to analyze. The slight crinkle around his eyes, the measured enthusiasm, the calculated affection. "Welcome home," I replied, returning his smile with one of my own. "How was the conference?" I watched him closely as he launched into a detailed account of fictional panel discussions and networking opportunities. His delivery was flawless, specific enough to seem authentic, vague enough to avoid verification. Had he always been this skilled at deception, or had years of practice perfected his technique? "I brought you something," he said, handing me the gift bag. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a compass. "To celebrate your 5th anniversary at the bank next month. I know it's early, but I couldn't resist when I saw it." The irony of a compass, a tool for finding one's way, wasn't lost on me. I slipped it onto my wrist, noted how perfectly it complemented the watch he'd given me for our anniversary 2 months earlier. Always thoughtful gifts, always precisely calibrated to my taste, part of his meticulous performance. "It's beautiful," I said truthfully. "Thank you." "How was your week?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch, his arm draped casually across my shoulders. "Anything exciting happen while I was away?" I felt the weight of his arm, the same arm that had embraced Vanessa in Thomas's photographs, that had rested on Ethan's shoulder with paternal pride. Now it rested on me, heavy with unspoken lies. "Just the usual," I replied, gesturing to my work documents. The Henderson portfolio is proving more complicated than we anticipated. I might need to work late a few nights next week to sort it out. An opening for him, another late work night, when he could slip away to Tacoma. I watched as he registered the information, the subtle shift in his expression as he calculated the opportunity. "That's too bad," he said, squeezing my shoulder, sympathetically. "But I know how important these projects are to you." We fell into our familiar evening routine, dinner preparation, casual conversation about colleagues and neighbors, plans for the weekend that neither of us would actually experience. Throughout it all, I maintained my performance, matching his deception with a carefully constructed fiction of my own. When he mentioned an upcoming client dinner the following week, Tuesday, the same day as his scheduled flight to Grand Cayman, I nodded with apparent disinterest, as if I hadn't just learned of his plans to disappear from my life forever on that very day. As we prepared for bed that night, I caught him checking his phone repeatedly, thumbs moving quickly over the screen. Messages to Vanessa, no doubt. Updates about their escape plan. Assurances that everything remained on schedule. "Everything okay?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of casual concern into my voice. "Just some client issues," he replied smoothly. "Nothing that can't wait until morning." Another lie, seamlessly delivered. I wondered how many thousands of similar lies had passed between us over the years, each one reinforcing the architecture of deception he had constructed around our marriage. That night, as Jason slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, apparently unburdened by conscience, I stared at the ceiling and calculated my next moves with the same precision I applied to complex financial analyses. By morning, I had a plan. While Jason showered, I sent a series of carefully worded text messages to Daniel, Thomas, and Angela, confirming our strategy and timeline. By the time Jason emerged from the bathroom, I had breakfast waiting and was dressed for a Saturday farmer's market trip, one of our regular weekend rituals. "I thought we could pick up ingredients for that pasta dish you like," I suggested. "Maybe invite the Hendersons over for dinner tomorrow night?" Jason hesitated fractionally, so briefly that I would never have noticed if I hadn't been watching for it. The Hendersons were our closest friends in Portland. Inviting them for dinner implied continuity, future plans, normalcy, none of which aligned with his imminent departure. "Sounds great," he said finally, "though I might need to step out for a client call in the afternoon. The Seattle situation is still developing." The Seattle situation, another fiction to explain his absence while he finalized preparations with Vanessa. "No problem," I replied. "Easily. I can handle the cooking prep while you're gone." Throughout our market excursion, I maintained casual conversation while observing Jason's micro behaviors with newfound clarity. The checks of his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, the momentary distractions when certain messages arrived, the subtle tension in his shoulders as Tuesday's departure approached. When he announced after lunch that he needed to run to the office for a few hours, I simply nodded and continued preparing vegetables for the dinner we'd planned. "Don't wait up if you get tired," he added, kissing my cheek. "These Saturday work sessions can run late." As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I texted Thomas. "Eagle has left the nest." Within 20 minutes, Thomas called to confirm that Jason had driven straight to I-5 North, the highway to Tacoma. Not to his office, not to meet a client, to his other home, his other family, his hidden life. "We've got 4 hours conservatively," Thomas estimated. "I'll meet you and Angela at your house in 30 minutes. While I waited, I moved through our home with purpose, seeing it now through the lens of what Thomas had revealed. The framed photos of our vacations together, the books and music we'd shared, the spaces where we'd built what I thought was a life together. Had any of it been real? Or had our entire relationship been an elaborate performance designed to serve Jason's dual existence? When the doorbell rang, I was ready. Angela and Thomas. entered with a focused energy that matched my own determination. "The emergency filings are complete," Angela reported, spreading documents across our dining table. "A judge has granted temporary freezes on all accounts associated with JV strategic partners, including the Cayman Islands transfer. And there's a temporary travel restriction preventing either Jason or Vanessa from taking Ethan out of the country, pending investigation of potential financial crimes." "What about our joint account?" I asked. "The $47,000 he transferred?" "That's been frozen as well," Angela confirmed. "He can't access those funds now, though we can't recover them immediately. Either. The court will determine appropriate distribution." Thomas added, "I've documented all movements between accounts over the past 5 years. The pattern of systematic diversion is clear. No judge will view this as normal marital financial management." For the next 3 hours, we methodically built our case, documenting assets, establishing timelines, cataloging deceptions. Angela prepared divorce filings designed to protect my interests while accounting for the extraordinary circumstances of Jason's double life. "There's one more thing we need to address," Angela said finally. "When does Jason learn that you know? This deception can't continue indefinitely, and the legal proceedings will notify him soon enough." I had given this question considerable thought. "Tuesday morning," I decided. "He believes I'm working late Monday, which gives him the perfect opportunity to finalize preparations with Vanessa. Tuesday morning, when he discovers he can't access the Cayman accounts and can't leave the country with Ethan, he'll know something's wrong. That's when I want him to learn exactly how wrong things have gone for him." Angela nodded approvingly. "Strategically sound. By Tuesday morning, all our legal protections will be firmly in place." After they left, I restored the house to its previous state, erasing all evidence of our planning session. When Jason returned home shortly after 8 p.m., I was curled on the couch with a novel, the picture of a contented wife enjoying a quiet Saturday evening. "How was the office?" I asked, noting the slight hesitation before his response. "Productive," he replied, loosening his tie. "We're making progress on the Seattle situation." I smiled and returned to my book, allowing him to believe his performance remained convincing. In reality, Thomas had confirmed that Jason had spent the afternoon with Vanessa and Ethan at their home in Tacoma, likely finalizing details for their planned escape. Sunday unfolded with similar theatrical precision. We hosted the Hendersons for dinner, all 4 of us laughing and making plans for a summer barbecue that Jason knew he would never attend. Throughout the evening, I watched him perform the role of devoted husband and friend with flawless execution. Attentive, charming, seemingly transparent. After our guests departed, Jason helped with cleanup, his movements efficient and practiced. "I meant to mention," he said casually, "I need to head to Seattle again on Tuesday, just overnight. That situation we've been working on is coming to a head." His flight to Grand Cayman, scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, the culmination of years of deception and planning. Delivered as a routine business trip. "No problem," I replied, equally casual. "I've got that late meeting for the Henderson portfolio anyway. The timing actually works out perfectly." He seemed pleased by my response, mistaking it for continued ignorance rather than calculated misdirection. "You're the best," he said, kissing my forehead. "Not many wives would be so understanding about these business trips." Not many wives would be simultaneously documenting their husband's systematic financial fraud and planning to dismantle his carefully constructed double life, I thought. But I simply smiled and continued drying dishes. Monday morning arrived, with a sense of accelerating momentum. Jason left for work with his usual routine: coffee, quick breakfast, a kiss goodbye that felt as hollow as I now knew our marriage to be. "I'll be home late," he reminded me. "Prep meetings for tomorrow's Seattle trip." In reality, Thomas had already confirmed Jason's actual plans for the day. a meeting with Vanessa at their lawyer's office in Tacoma, likely to finalize paperwork for their new life in the Cayman Islands. Final preparations before abandoning both his fabricated life with me and his legal obligations in the United States. As soon as Jason left, I contacted Daniel to implement the financial protection measures we had arranged. By noon, my personal accounts had been secured and restructured to prevent any possibility of Jason accessing them, even indirectly. My investments remained safely beyond his reach, growing steadily while he believed I lived paycheck to paycheck. I spent the afternoon at Angela's office, reviewing final legal preparations and signing the necessary documents. The temporary freezes on Jason's accounts would become permanent holds pending court proceedings. The travel restrictions would be reinforced with notifications to border control and transportation authorities. Once these are filed, Angela explained, "There's no turning back. Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to proceed?" I thought about the years of deception, the calculated financial manipulation, the child in Tacoma who shared my husband's name but not my knowledge, the planned abandonment scheduled for the very next day. "I'm certain," I replied. "File everything." By evening, all our preparations were complete. The legal documents were filed and processed. The financial restrictions were in place. The evidence was secured and documented. All that remained was for Jason to discover that his escape plan had collapsed, and that the wife he had underestimated for years had been the architect of its destruction. I returned home to an empty house, exactly as Jason had planned. He had texted earlier to report he would be working late with the team, another cover story for his final evening with Vanessa and Ethan before their planned departure. I moved through our home methodically, gathering items of personal significance, family, photographs, jewelry from my parents, documents from before our marriage. Not because I planned to leave, but because I wanted these treasured items secured before the confrontation that would come. As midnight approached, I prepared the guest bedroom where I would spend the night. I could no longer bear the thought of sharing a bed with Jason, maintaining the pretense of intimacy while knowing the extent of his betrayal. I left a simple note on his pillow. "We need to talk in the morning before your trip. Wake me when you get home. B." Just enough to make him pause. Not enough to reveal what I knew. A calculated disruption to his carefully orchestrated plan. Then I settled into the guest room and waited for the final act of our marriage to begin. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion eventually pulled me under. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why. Then reality crashed back. The guest room, the note, Jason. I checked my phone. 6:42 a.m. No texts from Jason. No missed calls. Had he come home at all? I opened the bedroom door cautiously and listened. The house was silent. I moved down the hallway to our bedroom. The bed was undisturbed, my note still centered on his pillow. The bathroom was empty. The kitchen showed no signs of morning coffee preparation. Jason hadn't come home. I checked my phone again, this time for messages from Thomas. There it was, sent at 5:17 a.m. Target remained at Tacoma residence overnight. Vehicle still present. Monitoring continues. Jason had spent the night with Vanessa and Ethan, the night before their planned departure. It made logical sense. Why? Return to Portland when they intended to leave for the airport directly from Tacoma the next day? What he didn't know was that their careful plans were already unraveling. While he slept in Tacoma, believing everything was proceeding according to schedule, the legal machinery we had set in motion was systematically dismantling his escape route. I texted Thomas, "Any movement this morning?" His reply came quickly, "Negative. Lights on in the house, no outside activity yet." I made coffee and settled at our dining table with my laptop, logging into my work email to maintain the appearance of a normal Tuesday morning. Angela had promised to call the moment our filings were processed and implemented. Until then, all. I could do was wait and monitor the situation through Thomas's updates. At 7:38 a.m., Thomas texted again. Movement at residence. Subject loading luggage into vehicle. They were starting their departure sequence, right on schedule. At 8:12 a.m., subjects leaving residence, all three in vehicle, tracking. Jason, Vanessa, and Ethan were on the move, presumably heading toward Seattle-Tacoma International Airport for their 1:15 p.m. flight to Grand Cayman. At 8:45 a.m., Angela called. "It's done," she reported. "All accounts frozen. Travel restrictions activated. Authorities notified. He won't be able to board that flight, and he won't be able to access any of the diverted funds." "Thank you," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "Please let me know when you hear anything further." At 9:23 a.m., Thomas's update arrived. Subjects arrived at SeaTac Airport, entering International Terminal. I could picture it clearly, Jason and Vanessa, confident in their meticulous planning, guiding Ethan through the bustling terminal, perhaps telling him about the beach where they would build sandcastles that afternoon. The culmination of years of deception, the beginning of their new life together, except it wasn't going to happen. At 10:07 a.m., Thomas texted again. Contact made, subjects denied boarding, passports flagged, security personnel involved. And then at 10:16 a.m., subject attempting to access banking via phone, visible agitation. Female subject also agitated. I could imagine their confusion, their rising panic as they discovered the carefully constructed exit route suddenly blocked. The Cayman accounts inaccessible, the flights unbookable, the escape impossible. At 10:31 a.m., my phone rang. Jason's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Becca." His voice was tight, controlled despite the crisis he was facing. "There's some kind of problem with our accounts. Did you transfer money recently or change any settings?" The pretense continued even now, as if the joint account he had emptied was experiencing a technical glitch rather than legal intervention. "Which accounts, Jason?" I asked, my voice steadier than I had expected. A pause. "Our joint checking. I'm trying to access it for a business expense, but it's showing as restricted." Another lie. He wasn't trying to access our joint checking account, which he had already emptied. He was trying to access the Cayman accounts where he had transferred the funds from JV strategic partners. "That's strange," I replied, maintaining the charade a moment longer. "While you're looking into that, could you explain something else for me?" "What's that?" His voice held a note of wariness now. "Could you explain why you, Vanessa, and Ethan were just denied boarding for your flight to Grand Cayman? Or why the accounts for JV strategic partners have been frozen by court order? Or perhaps why there's a temporary restraining order preventing you from taking your son out of the country?" The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear his breathing, slightly accelerated, as the implications of my words sank in. "Becca," he began, his voice now carefully modulated. "I don't know what you think is happening, but there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Jason," I interrupted, the pretense finally, mercifully over. "I know everything. About Vanessa, about Ethan, about the business you've hidden for years, about the money you've been diverting, about the life you've been living in Tacoma while lying to me in Portland." Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, harder, more calculating. The performance of devoted husband abandoned now that it no longer served his purpose. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to stop you from disappearing with money that isn't solely yours to take," I replied. "Long enough to document every transfer, every deception, every calculated move you've made over the years." I heard muffled conversation on his end, Jason speaking to Vanessa, presumably explaining that their plans had collapsed. "What do you want?" he asked finally, the question revealing how completely he had misunderstood me throughout our marriage. As if this were a negotiation. As if I were leveraging his deception for personal gain rather than seeking accountability for his actions. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I replied. "Angela Wilson's office will be contacting you regarding divorce proceedings. All financial matters will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. The courts will determine the disposition of the funds you've hidden and diverted." "You're making a mistake," he warned, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can work this out between us. No need for lawyers or courts." The familiar manipulation, appealing to my preference for harmony, my aversion to conflict. It might have worked a week ago, before I had seen the full extent of his deception. "We're well beyond that point, Jason," I said quietly. "You emptied our joint account. You purchased one-way tickets to leave the country. You've been lying to me for most of our marriage. There's nothing left to work out between us." "What about the townhouse?" he demanded, grasping for leverage. "Your car? The retirement accounts? You really want to lose half of everything in a divorce?" I allowed myself a small smile, though he couldn't see it. "I'm not concerned about the financial implications. I've been preparing for contingencies far longer than you realize. My personal accounts and investments were never accessible to you. Unlike you, I actually am good at financial management." His sharp intake of breath told me this information had landed. Throughout our marriage, Jason had positioned himself as the financial expert, the one who understood money management and investment strategy. Learning that I had not only maintained separate finances, but had built substantial investments without, his knowledge or input struck at the core of his self-perception. "How much?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity despite the circumstances. "Enough," I replied simply. "More than enough to ensure that your betrayal hasn't compromised my financial security. The court will handle the rest." In the background, I could hear Vanessa's voice rising, though I couldn't make out her words. The perfect family unit Jason had constructed in Tacoma was beginning to fracture under pressure. "I need to go," Jason said abruptly. "We're not done talking about this." "Actually, we are," I corrected him. "From this point forward, all communication should go through our respective legal representatives. Goodbye, Jason." I ended the call before he could respond, setting my phone down on the table with hands that trembled slightly. Not from fear or uncertainty, but from the release of tension after days of careful performance. It was done. The pretense was over. The careful construction of lies that had constituted our marriage had finally collapsed, exposing the truth that had been hidden beneath its surface all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Court dates being set. Initial hearing next week. All restrictions holding. You did well." Outside my window, spring sunshine illuminated the garden Jason and I had planted together last year. Tulips and daffodils pushing through soil that had seemed frozen and lifeless just weeks ago. There was something fitting about the timing, about ending a winter of deception just as new growth became possible. I wasn't naive enough to believe the coming months would be easy. There would be legal battles, financial untangling, emotional aftershocks I couldn't yet predict. The end of a 10-year marriage, even one built on deception, wouldn't come without pain and loss. But as I looked at those resilient spring blooms, I felt something unexpected unfurling within me as well. Not just relief or vindication, but a quiet, determined hope. The kind that comes from discovering your own strength precisely when you need it most. Jason had emptied our joint account, believing it would finance his escape from the life we'd built. What he hadn't known, what he had never bothered to discover during our years together, was that I had been quietly building resources of my own. Not just financial assets, though those would serve me well in the coming transition, but internal resources of patience, determination, and clarity. In trying to leave me with nothing, Jason had unwittingly revealed everything I already possessed, within myself. And that, I was beginning to understand, was worth far more than any bank account, joint or otherwise. I waited in my Portland townhouse, staring at my silent phone while the spring rain tapped against the windows. It had been 3 days since Jason's failed escape attempt. 3 days since his carefully constructed plan had collapsed under the weight of legal intervention. 3 days of deliberate silence on my part as the machinery of divorce proceedings moved forward. Angela had advised me to maintain a clear boundary, all communication through attorneys only. "He'll try to manipulate you directly," she'd warned. "Men like Jason don't surrender control easily." She was right, of course. The text messages had started within hours of our final phone conversation. First apologetic. "Becca, please talk. To me, we need to work this out." Then bargaining. "I can explain everything. We could start fresh." Finally, thinly veiled threats. "You don't understand what you're doing. This legal approach will destroy everything we've built." I hadn't responded to any of them. The townhouse felt different now. Spaces that had once seemed warm and comfortable now carried shadows of deception. Had Jason been sitting at our kitchen island planning his escape while I made us dinner? Had he been messaging Vanessa from the living room couch while pretending to work late? Every corner of what I'd thought was our home now raised questions about what else had been fabricated. My phone buzzed, not Jason this time, but Daniel. "How are you holding up?" he asked when I answered. "Floating," I replied. "Honestly, sometimes I feel completely detached, like I'm watching someone else's life unravel. Other times it hits me all at once." "That's normal," Daniel assured me. "Financial betrayal is particularly disorienting. It combines emotional deception with concrete violations of trust. Your brain is processing both simultaneously." After checking on my emotional state, Daniel shifted to practical matters. "I've completed the full audit of your personal finances. Everything is secure and properly structured to protect you during the divorce proceedings. Your investment portfolio remains strong, completely untouched by Jason's actions." This confirmation brought a wave of relief. The financial fortress I'd built over years of careful planning remained intact, a foundation upon which I could rebuild whatever came next. "There's something else," Daniel added, his tone shifting slightly. "The forensic accountants have finished their preliminary review of JV strategic partners. The company appears substantially more profitable than Thomas initially estimated. Their contracts with tech firms throughout the Pacific Northwest have generated nearly $2.3 million over the past 3 years, with approximately $1.7 million transferred to personal accounts controlled by Jason and Vanessa. The magnitude took my breath away. All while Jason was telling me we needed to cut household expenses because his income was decreasing." "Exactly," Daniel confirmed. "This level of financial concealment changes the legal landscape significantly. Angela is updating the divorce filing to reflect these findings." After thanking Daniel and ending the call, I wandered through the townhouse, touching familiar objects that now seemed like artifacts from a marriage that had never truly existed. The wedding photos on the mantle, the anniversary gifts displayed on bookshelves, the vacation souvenirs we'd collected together. All of it felt like props from an elaborate stage production that had finally closed after a decade-long run. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Thomas. "Both subjects have retained counsel, J using Hammond from Preston and Associates, V using Michaels from Westbrook Law. Both firms specialize in high-asset divorce and financial fraud defense." I forwarded the information to Angela, who responded almost immediately. "Expected. Hammond is aggressive but sloppy when pressured. Michaels is more methodical. Interesting that they've chosen separate representation so quickly. The United front may be cracking." The observation caused me to pause. I had been thinking of Jason and Vanessa as a unified conspiracy, partners in deception who had worked together seamlessly for years. But faced with legal consequences, they had immediately sought separate counsel to protect their individual interests. Perhaps their partnership wasn't as solid as I had assumed. The thought planted a seed of possibility that would grow in importance over the coming days. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for one, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery person holding a large bouquet of flowers. For a moment, I considered not answering, assuming they were from Jason, another manipulation attempt disguised as a romantic gesture. But curiosity won out. I accepted the delivery, noting that the card wasn't in Jason's handwriting. Inside was a simple message. Your strength inspires us all. We're here whenever you need us. The PNB team. My colleagues at Pacific Northwest Banking had somehow learned about my situation. The gesture, so unexpected and genuine, broke through the emotional numbness I'd been maintaining. For the first time since discovering Jason's deception, I allowed myself to cry freely. The flowers cradled in my arms as I sank to the floor of my entryway. The tears weren't just for the marriage I'd lost or the betrayal I'd endured. They were for the realization that I wasn't as alone as I had felt. While Jason had been building his secret life in Tacoma, I had been building authentic connections. In Portland, colleagues who valued me, friendships that would outlast my marriage, a professional identity entirely separate from the relationship that had collapsed. By morning, a new resolve had taken root. I showered, dressed professionally, and prepared to return to work for the first time since the confrontation. Angela had suggested taking more time, but continuing to hide in the townhouse felt like giving Jason's deception more power over my life than it deserved. The office environment provided a welcome structure. My team greeted me with quiet support. No intrusive questions, just calm reassurance that my projects had been maintained in my absence and could be resumed at my pace. My boss, Catherine, pulled me into her office briefly to offer both personal support and professional flexibility. Whatever you need, reduced hours, remote work options, project adjustments, just say the word, she assured me. Your position here is secure regardless of what's happening in your personal life. The contrast between Catherine's straightforward support and Jason's years of manipulation was stark. Here was transparency, genuine concern, and respect for boundaries. Everything that had been missing from my marriage without my realizing it. By mid-afternoon, I had re-immersed myself in the Henderson portfolio analysis, finding comfort in the clear patterns of financial data. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't maintain secret families or construct elaborate deceptions. They simply revealed truths for those who knew how to interpret them, a skill I had spent my career developing and would now apply to rebuilding my life. When my office phone rang at 3:42 p.m., I answered automatically, still focused on my spreadsheet. Rebecca Mitchell speaking. Mrs. Mitchell. A woman's voice, unfamiliar but commanding. This is Vanessa Cooper. The spreadsheet blurred before my eyes as adrenaline surged through my system. Vanessa, Jason's partner in deception, the woman who had knowingly participated in the fiction of my marriage for nearly a decade, was calling me directly at work. I took a steadying breath. Ms. Cooper, I believe our attorneys have advised against direct contact. They have, she acknowledged, her tone businesslike rather than apologetic. But there are aspects of this situation that require a different approach. I should have hung up. Angela would have advised exactly that. No direct communication, no opportunity for manipulation. But something in Vanessa's tone, a controlled urgency that matched my own analytical nature, made me curious. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm not calling about Jason or the money, Vanessa stated directly. I'm calling about Ethan. He's 8 years old and doesn't understand why his world is suddenly falling apart. He deserves better than being collateral damage in this situation. The mention of Ethan, the innocent child caught between adult deceptions, pierced through my emotional armor. Despite everything, I had been thinking about him since seeing his photograph. in Thomas's files. I agree, I replied carefully. But I'm not sure what you expect from me. I'm not the one who created this situation. No, you're not, Vanessa conceded, surprising me with her directness. Jason created this mess, and now he's making it worse. He's using Ethan as leverage in the legal proceedings, claiming that freezing the accounts is harming his son's welfare, and that you're deliberately trying to hurt a child you've never met. Her revelation aligned with what Angela had mentioned earlier that morning. Jason's legal team was attempting to reframe the narrative, casting me as vindictive rather than protective of legitimate marital assets. That's not my intention, I said firmly. The legal actions were necessary to prevent funds from disappearing permanently. Once the court determines appropriate distribution, I have no desire to impact Ethan's well-being. Vanessa was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. I believe you, which is why I'm calling. I'd like to meet, privately, no lawyers, no Jason. Just you and me to discuss Ethan's needs separate from the rest of this legal battle. Every instinct warned against such a meeting. This woman had participated in deceiving me for years. She had presented herself as Jason's wife while knowing he was married to someone else. She had planned to disappear with him to the Cayman Islands, taking millions in concealed assets. And yet, she was also a mother protecting her child. That, at least, appeared genuine. I need to consult with my attorney, I replied cautiously. I can't make that decision unilaterally. I understand, Vanessa said. But please consider that while the lawyers fight over money and property, Ethan is suffering in ways that will shape his entire life. Some things shouldn't be decided by legal teams. After she hung up, I sat motionless at my desk, her words reverberating through my thoughts. The complexity of the situation had just expanded significantly. Until now, I had viewed Vanessa primarily as Jason's accomplice, a willing participant in his deception. But her call revealed something I hadn't fully considered: her independent motivation to protect her son, potentially separate from Jason's agenda. I called Angela immediately to report the conversation. Absolutely not, she responded when I described Vanessa's request for a meeting. This is textbook manipulation. They're looking for ways to circumvent the legal process and gain leverage. That was my first thought too, I acknowledged. But what if there's more to it? What if Vanessa's concerns about Ethan are genuine, independent of Jason's manipulation? Angela sighed, her skepticism evident even through the phone. Becca, I understand your compassion for the child. That speaks to your character. But remember, Vanessa has been an active participant in defrauding you for years. She knew about you, helped hide money from you, and was planning to disappear with those funds. Her credibility is non-existent. I know, I agreed. But something in her voice, it felt different from Jason's manipulation tactics. More direct, less emotionally coercive. That's just a different manipulation style, Angela countered. Some people use emotion, others use apparent rationality. Both can be equally deceptive. She was right, of course. From a legal and protective standpoint, meeting with Vanessa would create unnecessary risk with no clear benefit. And yet, as I returned to my analysis after the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important might be gained from such a conversation. Not just for Ethan, but for my own understanding of the situation. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Thomas called with an update that added another dimension to my considerations. I've been monitoring communications between Jason and Vanessa, he reported. They're increasingly at odds. Jason wanted to use Ethan as leverage from the beginning, claiming financial hardship to generate sympathy with the court. Vanessa initially resisted but appeared to be following his lead. And now? I prompted. Now there's a significant shift. After meeting with her attorney yesterday, Vanessa seems to be developing an independent strategy. Their text exchanges have become tense. Jason accused her of undermining their united front. Vanessa responded that her priority is protecting Ethan, not Jason's reputation. This information aligned with what I had sensed during my conversation with Vanessa, that her motives might be separating from Jason's as legal reality set in. There's more, Thomas added. Vanessa has requested a separate forensic accounting of JV strategic partners, independent from both Jason's legal team and the court-ordered review. She appears concerned that Jason may have hidden assets from her, as well. The implications were significant. If Vanessa was beginning to question Jason's financial transparency with her, the unified deception I had imagined might be fracturing in ways that could reshape the entire situation. "Thank you, Thomas," I said thoughtfully. "This changes things." After ending the call, I made a decision that contradicted Angela's explicit advice, but felt increasingly necessary. I texted Vanessa. "Regarding Ethan, willing to meet. Neutral. Location, daytime only. No discussion of legal proceedings." Her response came within minutes. "Thank you. Tomorrow, 1 p.m., Portland Art Museum Cafe. Public but discreet." I confirmed the arrangement, then immediately informed both Thomas and Angela of my decision. Angela was predictably displeased, though her response focused on establishing ground rules rather than trying to dissuade me. "No discussions of assets or legal strategy," she instructed firmly. "No agreements of any kind without counsel review. And Thomas should maintain surveillance." From a distance, Thomas was more pragmatic. "I'll be there. Museum Cafe has good sightlines and multiple exits. I'll position accordingly." The following morning brought steady rain, typical Portland spring weather that matched my contemplative mood. I dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a professional but approachable outfit that projected confidence without intimidation. The Museum Cafe would be public enough for safety, but quiet enough for a private conversation. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of both entrances. Thomas confirmed his position via text. "Northeast corner by the modern exhibit. Visual on all approaches." At precisely 1 p.m., Vanessa Cooper entered the cafe. Seeing her in person rather than in surveillance photographs was jarring. She was tall and poised, dressed in a simple gray suit that suggested corporate competence. Nothing about her appearance aligned with the stereotype of the other woman. No flashy jewelry or provocative styling. She looked like what she was, a successful marketing executive and mother. Our eyes met across the room, and she approached my table directly. Up close, I could see the strain of recent days and the tension around her eyes and the slight tightness of her smile. "Rebecca," she acknowledged, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." We shook hands briefly, a strangely formal gesture between two women whose lives had been unknowingly intertwined for years. "Let me be clear about boundaries," I began as she sat down. "I'm here to discuss Ethan's well-being only. I won't discuss legal proceedings, financial matters, or my marriage to Jason." Vanessa nodded, seemingly relieved by the directness. "Agreed. My only concern today is Ethan." A server approached, and we both ordered coffee, creating a momentary reprieve from the tension between us. When the server departed, Vanessa pulled out her phone, tapped briefly, then turned it to show me a photograph. "This is Ethan," she said simply. The boy smiled broadly from the screen, his front tooth missing, freckles scattered across his nose. He was sitting on what appeared to be a soccer field, a trophy clutched proudly in his hands. He had Jason's eyes, the connection unmistakable, even to someone who had just learned of his existence. "He plays midfield," Vanessa continued. "Loves science and anything to do with space. Wants to be an astronaut or maybe a veterinarian, depending on the day you ask him." I studied the photo, trying to reconcile this real child with the abstract concept I had been grappling with since discovering Jason's deception. This wasn't just a line item in legal proceedings or a pawn in Jason's manipulations. This was a young boy whose understanding of his life and family was currently shattering. "How much does he know?" I asked quietly. Vanessa put the phone away, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "He knows that his dad isn't going on the trip we had planned. He knows that there are grown-up problems being sorted out. He knows something is seriously wrong because he can feel the tension and see that I've been crying." She paused, collecting herself. "What he doesn't know is that his entire understanding of his family has been built on lies. He doesn't know that his father has another wife. He doesn't know that the life we've built was funded through deception. He doesn't know that his dad was planning to take him away from his school, his friends, his soccer team, everything familiar, to escape legal consequences." The raw emotion in her voice couldn't be faked. Whatever Vanessa's complicity in Jason's deception, her concern for her son was genuine. "What are you hoping for from me?" I asked directly. "Two things," Vanessa replied, equally direct. "First, a commitment that whatever happens with the legal proceedings, you won't seek to punish Ethan for his parents' actions. His educational needs, his activities, his stability, these shouldn't be bargaining chips in the divorce." "I agree completely," I said without hesitation. "I have no desire to impact Ethan's well-being regardless of the outcome of the legal proceedings." Relief softened Vanessa's expression slightly. "Thank you. The second thing is more complicated. I need to understand what happened from your perspective. Not the legal details, but the human reality. What Jason told me about your marriage differs significantly from what I'm now learning through the investigation. I need to know what was real and what wasn't if I'm going to help Ethan through this." Her request caught me off guard. I had expected negotiations about financial support or custody arrangements, practical matters with clear boundaries. Instead, she was asking for my narrative, my experience of the deception we had both been subjected to in different ways. "What exactly did Jason tell you about our marriage?" I asked cautiously. Vanessa's expression tightened. "That it was essentially over but maintained for professional appearances. That you were completely focused on your career and had no interest in family life. That you had separate lives under the same roof, with an understanding that he could pursue his own happiness." The fabrication was so complete, so contrary to the reality of my experience, that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts before responding. "None of that is true," I said finally. "We didn't have a perfect marriage, but it wasn't remotely what he described to you. I worked hard at my career, yes, but I also invested in our relationship. I wanted children. Jason was the one who repeatedly delayed family planning, claiming financial concerns that I now understand were completely fabricated." I paused, noting the surprise in Vanessa's eyes. "Until a week ago, I believed we had a solid partnership. I had no idea about you, about Ethan, about the business you built together, or about his plans to disappear with all of it." Vanessa looked down at her hands, which had tightened around her coffee cup. "He told me you knew about us on some level, that you preferred not to acknowledge it directly because of how it would affect your professional image at the bank." "Another complete fabrication," I confirmed. "I had no knowledge of any of it until I discovered he had emptied our joint account." We sat in silence for a moment, two women processing the extent of the deceptions that had shaped our lives without our knowledge or consent. "Did you never suspect?" Vanessa asked finally. "In all those years?" "There were inconsistencies I rationalized away," I admitted. "Work trips that seemed unnecessarily frequent. Financial discussions that never quite added up. But I trusted him, so I accepted explanations that now seem obviously inadequate." "I did the same," Vanessa acknowledged quietly. "When he couldn't attend certain events because of Portland commitments, when he was unavailable on weekends or holidays, I believed we were working toward a future where those limitations wouldn't exist." Another silence fell between us, but different now, less adversarial, more contemplative. For the first time, I considered that Vanessa might be as much a victim of Jason's manipulations as I was, albeit in completely different ways. "What will you tell Ethan?" I asked. Vanessa sighed deeply. "The truth, eventually, in age-appropriate ways. That his father made serious mistakes that hurt people, including us. That adults sometimes make terrible choices with painful consequences. That none of it is Ethan's fault, and nothing about it changes how loved he is." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Which is why I need to understand as much of the truth as possible. I can't help him navigate this if I'm still operating on Jason's fabrications." I nodded slowly, recognizing the legitimacy of her position. However complicated our connection, we shared a common need: to extract truth from the tangled web of lies Jason had woven around both our lives. For the next hour, we exchanged experiences, each filling in pieces of the other's puzzle. I described the financial manipulations I had discovered, the systematic diversion of funds, the calculated creation of financial anxiety in our marriage while he built wealth elsewhere. Vanessa detailed how Jason had positioned their relationship as the real one, with his marriage to me described as a fading arrangement maintained primarily for professional convenience. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had created entirely separate narratives for his two lives, each carefully crafted to maintain control and prevent either woman from questioning the inconsistencies in his behavior. He had used my career focus to explain absences to Vanessa while simultaneously using business requirements to explain absences to me. He had created financial anxiety in both households while accumulating substantial hidden assets. He had promised each of us futures that were mutually exclusive. "He nearly succeeded," Vanessa observed as our conversation wound down. "If the transfer alert hadn't notified you, if you hadn't investigated so quickly, we would be in Grand Cayman right now. Ethan would be enrolled in a new school, starting yet another narrative built on lies." "What stopped you from questioning it all?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "The sudden move, the urgency, the secrecy?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "He framed it as our long-awaited chance to be a real family without constraints or complications. I wanted that so badly for Ethan, for him to have his father fully present without the constant divided attention and scheduling conflicts. I overlooked the red flags because the destination seemed to justify the means." Her explanation resonated, more than I wanted to admit. Hadn't I similarly overlooked warning signs because I trusted Jason's explanations? Hadn't I accepted financial restrictions because I believed in our shared future? We had been manipulated in different ways toward different ends, but the underlying mechanism, exploiting trust and desire for connection, was identical. As we prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated, then asked the question that had likely motivated her call in the first place. "What happens now? With the legal proceedings, with Ethan's future?" "I can't predict all outcomes," I replied honestly. "But I can tell you my priorities. First, securing my own financial future that Jason attempted to destroy. Second, ensuring that the truth about JV strategic partners and the hidden assets is fully documented and appropriately addressed by the courts. Neither of those objectives requires harming Ethan's interests. If anything, documenting the full extent of Jason's deception will help ensure that appropriate resources are available for Ethan's future." Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's more reasonable than I expected, given the circumstances." "The circumstances are extraordinary," I acknowledged. "But punishing an 8-year-old boy for his father's actions would solve nothing and help no one." As we stood to leave, Vanessa extended her hand again. "Thank you for meeting with me. For what it's worth, everything Jason told me about you appears to have been false, including his characterization of you as cold and career-obsessed. Your compassion for Ethan, despite everything, speaks to who you really are." I accepted her handshake, finding strange comfort in this moment of authentic connection after years of living adjacent to manipulation and deception. "I'd like to propose something," I said as we walked toward the exit. "Separate from the legal proceedings. I think we should maintain direct communication about Ethan's needs, not to circumvent our attorneys on financial matters, but to ensure his well-being doesn't get lost in legal maneuvering." Vanessa appeared surprised, but nodded agreement. "I'd welcome that. Ethan deserves advocates who see him as more than a factor in divorce negotiations." As we parted outside the museum, rain still falling steadily around us, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity emerging from what had initially seemed an ill-advised meeting. Vanessa wasn't merely Jason's co-conspirator, as I had assumed. She was a complex individual with her own motivations, her own blind spots, and her own determination to protect her child from the fallout of Jason's deceptions. Understanding this dimension transformed my perspective on the entire situation. What had appeared as a unified conspiracy between Jason and Vanessa now revealed itself as something more nuanced, a complex web of manipulation in which we had all been caught, albeit in different ways and with different consequences. This realization would prove crucial in the weeks ahead as the legal proceedings intensified and Jason's attempts at manipulation grew increasingly desperate. The conversation with Vanessa had unintentionally provided me with something invaluable, not just insight into Ethan's needs, but a clearer understanding of the full scope of Jason's deception and the potential leverage points that understanding created. As Thomas joined me at my car, his expression reflected professional concern. "That was longer than expected," he noted. "Did it go as planned?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "No," I admitted. "It went much better than planned. I think we just changed the entire dynamic of this situation." And as I drove away from the museum, raindrops streaming across my windshield, I felt something shift within me. A transformation from reactive to proactive, from victim to strategist. Jason had underestimated both women in his life. That miscalculation would ultimately determine everything that followed. The legal proceedings moved forward with methodical precision as spring gave way to early summer in Portland. Each week brought new developments as the full extent of Jason's financial deception became increasingly clear through court-ordered forensic accounting. Angela called me into her office on a particularly bright Tuesday morning, the conference table covered with organized stacks of documents, the latest findings from the investigation. "The court has finished the preliminary financial review," she explained, gesturing toward the materials. "And the results are illuminating, to say the least." I settled into a chair as Angela outlined what the forensic accountants had uncovered. The picture was far more complex than we had initially understood. Beyond the JV strategic partners venture with Vanessa, Jason had established a network of shell companies and investment vehicles designed to obscure the flow of funds. Money had moved through at least 7 different corporate entities before landing in various personal accounts, some domestic, others international. The total hidden assets currently identified exceed $2 million, Angela reported, tapping a summary document. "That's substantially more than our initial estimates." I processed this information with the analytical detachment I'd been cultivating over the past weeks. The numbers were staggering, yet somehow abstract. Figures on paper rather than tangible representations of years of systematic deception. How much of this was shared with Vanessa versus hidden from both of us? I asked, thinking of our museum conversation. Angela flipped to another document. Based on account access records and transaction authorizations, approximately 60% of the hidden assets were jointly managed with Vanessa through JV strategic partners. The remaining 40%, about $1.7 million, appears to have been controlled exclusively by Jason, with no documented access by either you or Vanessa. This revelation aligned with what Vanessa had begun to suspect during our meeting, that Jason's deception hadn't been limited to his life with me. He had maintained a third layer of financial secrecy beyond both relationships. "There's something else," Angela continued, her expression carefully neutral as she placed a final document before me. "The accounts controlled exclusively by Jason show substantial transfers to a recipient identified only as MK Consulting in Phoenix. Regular payments over the past 16 months totaling approximately $230,000. Another business partner?" I wondered aloud. "Possibly," Angela acknowledged. "Or another personal relationship. The patterns are consistent with the methods he used to funnel money to the Tacoma household during the early years of that arrangement." The implication hung in the air between us. Could Jason have been establishing yet another parallel life beyond both mine and Vanessa's? The possibility should have shocked me, but instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if we were discussing a case study rather than my actual life. "I'd like Thomas to look into it," I decided. Not because it particularly matters to me personally at this point, but because any additional financial connections could impact the court's distribution decisions. Angela nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right approach. This isn't about emotional closure anymore. It's about ensuring complete financial transparency before final judgments are rendered." As I left Angela's office, I found myself contemplating how profoundly my perspective had shifted over the past 2 months. The initial shock and hurt had given way to something more measured, a determination to understand the complete truth, not for emotional vindication, but for practical resolution. Thomas called that evening to discuss the Phoenix connection. "I've identified MK Consulting," he reported. "It's a single-member LLC registered to Michelle Keating, 42, marketing consultant specializing in the tech sector, previously employed at Nexus Technologies until approximately 18 months ago." The pieces immediately connected in my mind. The same company where Jason and Vanessa work, she would have known both of them. "Exactly," Thomas confirmed. "I've conducted preliminary surveillance. Keating maintains a high-end condominium in Scottsdale. Jason has visited 6 times in the past year, according to his travel records. Each visit coincides with a significant transfer to MK Consulting." "Business consulting would be the obvious explanation," I mused. "Except the timing doesn't align with any documented business activities for either JV strategic partners or Jason's official role at Nexus," Thomas countered. "And there's more. Keating purchased her condominium 14 months ago, $1. $2 million, paid with a combination of cash and a mortgage. The cash portion, $400,000, was wired from an account linked to one of Jason's shell companies. The pattern was unmistakable. He helped her establish a new life in Phoenix, then began making regular payments disguised as consulting fees." "It appears so," Thomas agreed. "Would you like me to continue investigating this connection?" Considered the question carefully. Learning about Vanessa and Ethan had been earth-shattering. Discovering yet another layer of deception should have felt equally devastating. Instead, it merely confirmed what I had already come to understand about Jason. His capacity for compartmentalization and deception was virtually limitless. "Yes," I decided finally. "Not for personal reasons, but because it might impact the legal proceedings. If Jason has been diverting marital assets to establish yet another household or relationship, the court should know." "Understood," Thomas replied. "I'll provide a full report by the end of the week." After ending the call, I walked to the key townhouse balcony and looked out over the Portland skyline, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the city. The woman who had stood in this same spot months earlier, confident in her marriage, concerned only about routine financial matters, seemed like a stranger now. I had changed fundamentally, not broken, as Jason might have expected, but transformed. The financial analyst who had quietly built her own security while her husband planned his escape had become something more, someone who could face deception without flinching, who could make strategic decisions unclouded by emotional reactions. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Court date confirmed for financial deposition. Wondering if we might meet beforehand to discuss approach regarding Ethan's needs. Since our museum conversation, Vanessa and I had maintained limited, but cordial communication focused exclusively on ensuring Ethan's well-being remained a priority despite the increasingly contentious legal proceedings. These discussions existed in a carefully maintained separate channel from the divorce negotiations, a pragmatic arrangement that both Angela and Vanessa's attorney had reluctantly accepted as beneficial for the child involved. I texted back, "Available tomorrow after 5 p.m. Same location?" Her reply came quickly, "Perfect, thank you." The museum cafe had become our neutral territory, a space where we could speak frankly without the performance aspects that characterized interactions with Jason or the formal restrictions of legal proceedings. Our conversations remained focused on Ethan, but they had gradually revealed more about the parallel lives Jason had constructed and maintained. The following evening, I arrived at the cafe to find Vanessa already seated at what had become our table, a cup of coffee and a manila folder in front of her. "Thank you for coming," she greeted me, her expression more strained than during our previous meetings. "Something has come up that I thought you should know about before the deposition." She opened the folder and pushed it toward me. Inside was a printout of an email chain between Jason and someone identified only as MK. The messages discussed property options in Scottsdale, with specific reference to proximity to certain schools and family-friendly neighborhoods. "I found this while preparing documents for my attorney," Vanessa explained. "At first, I thought it might be related to a client project, but the content seemed oddly personal. When I questioned Jason, he became defensive and claimed it was a potential investment property he was considering for JV strategic partners. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I noted how perfectly this aligned with Thomas's findings. But you don't believe that explanation." Vanessa's mouth tightened. "I had our operations director check our client roster and investment proposals. There's nothing related to residential property in Arizona. Nothing involving anyone with the initials MK." I considered how much to reveal about Thomas's investigation. While Vanessa and I had established a working relationship regarding Ethan, we were still on opposite sides of a complex legal proceeding involving millions in disputed assets. "Have you shared this with your attorney?" I asked. "Not yet," Vanessa admitted. "I wanted to understand it better first. Jason has been—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Increasingly erratic since the failed Grand Cayman plan, making unilateral decisions about company funds without consulting me, changing passwords on accounts we previously shared. I'm concerned about what else he might be hiding from both of us." Her candor presented an opportunity. If Jason was indeed isolating control of assets from Vanessa as well as me, a strategic alliance might benefit both our positions against his attempts to shield resources from the court's review. "The initials MK likely refer to Michelle Keating," I said carefully. "Former Nexus Technologies employee, now established in Scottsdale. Jason has been making substantial payments to her consulting company over the past 16 months. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, her composure momentarily fracturing. "Michelle Keating from marketing development? She left Nexus abruptly last year. Jason said she had family issues that required relocation. She relocated to a $1.2 million condominium. Purchased with funds linked to Jason," I clarified, watching comprehension dawn across Vanessa's features. "He's been establishing another household," she concluded, her voice flat. "Another relationship, while maintaining both of ours." I nodded, feeling a strange compassion for the woman sitting across from me, someone who had unknowingly occupied a middle position in Jason's concentric circles of deception. I had been the outermost circle, entirely unaware of Vanessa and Ethan. Vanessa had occupied the middle circle, aware of my existence but believing herself to be the emotionally primary relationship. Now we were discovering an innermost circle that even Vanessa had been excluded from. "How did you learn about this?" Vanessa asked after a moment of processing. "The forensic accountants identified unusual transfers to MK Consulting. Given the pattern similarity to how funds were initially transferred to establish your household in Tacoma, we investigated further." Vanessa closed the folder slowly, her movements deliberate as she gathered her thoughts. "I should feel betrayed, I suppose. And I do, on some level. But mostly I feel..." She searched for the right word. "Validated. I've been questioning my own perception of reality since this all began, wondering if I'd somehow misunderstood our relationship, if I'd imagined the commitment Jason had shown to me and Ethan. Learning about this Phoenix connection confirms what I've been suspecting, that Jason's capacity for deception extends far beyond what either of us initially understood." Her reaction mirrored my own evolving response to each new revelation. Less personal hurt, more analytical confirmation of patterns already identified. We had both moved beyond the initial shock to a more detached assessment of the man who had occupied central positions in our respective lives. "How will this impact the depositional approach regarding Ethan?" I asked, bringing us back to the original purpose of our meeting. Vanessa refocused, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "It changes my strategy significantly. Until now, I've been operating under the assumption that I needed to balance Ethan's relationship with his father against the legal complexities. But if Jason has been establishing yet another household, potentially another family unit..." She didn't need to complete the thought. We both understood the implications for Ethan's stability and emotional well-being if Jason was already disinvesting from his relationship with his son in Tacoma while building new connections in Phoenix. "I'll be seeking primary custody with more restrictive visitation terms," Vanessa continued, "and I'll be submitting this evidence regarding the Phoenix connection to support that position. My attorney advised against sharing this approach with you, but I felt you deserved to know, given our ongoing communication about Ethan's needs." Her transparency surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Over our several meetings, we had established an unusual alliance. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition that Jason had manipulated both our lives in parallel ways. This created a strange bond that existed alongside, yet separate, from the adversarial nature of the legal proceedings. "I appreciate the heads up," I acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I support any approach that provides stability for Ethan during this process. My issues with Jason and the financial deceptions have nothing to do with his relationship with his son." Vanessa nodded gratefully. "Which brings me to a related matter. My attorney will be proposing a modification to the asset distribution approach during the deposition. Rather than treating all hidden assets as a single pool to be divided, we'll be advocating for a 3-tier approach." She outlined the proposal. Assets clearly derived from Jason's work with me in Portland would be primarily allocated in my direction. Assets generated through JV strategic partners would be primarily directed toward Vanessa and Ethan's future security, and assets that Jason had attempted to divert to Phoenix or other undisclosed destinations would be frozen pending further investigation and ultimately divided according to court determination. The approach was surprisingly reasonable, acknowledging the distinctly different sources of the hidden funds rather than lumping everything together. It also strategically positioned both Vanessa and me against Jason's attempts to shield assets entirely from court oversight. "I'll have my attorney review the proposal," I replied cautiously. "But conceptually, it seems more aligned with the actual financial reality than treating everything as a single pool." As our meeting concluded, Vanessa hesitated, then asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Have you spoken directly with Jason since the confrontation?" "No," I answered truthfully. "All communication has been through attorneys. He's made several attempts to contact me directly, but I've maintained that boundary." Vanessa nodded, understanding in her expression. He's been alternating between apologetic and accusatory with me, claiming one day that he made terrible mistakes, then the next day blaming me for the collapse of his plans. It's been destabilizing, especially with Ethan witnessing some of these mood shifts. Her description confirmed what Thomas had reported from his ongoing surveillance. Jason's behavior had become increasingly erratic as the legal walls closed in around him. The man who had maintained perfect compartmentalization for years was beginning to fracture under the pressure of his exposed deceptions. The most effective response is consistent boundaries, I advised, drawing on my own experience with financial risk management. Any engagement, whether positive or negative, reinforces his belief that manipulation remains possible. Vanessa considered this perspective. You're right. I've been trying to facilitate his relationship with Ethan despite everything, but the inconsistency is becoming harmful in itself. As we parted outside the museum, I was struck by the improbable evolution of our relationship. From unwitting participants in Jason's parallel lives to strategic allies in navigating the aftermath of his deception. Not friends, exactly, but fellow travelers on an unexpected journey neither of us had chosen. The following week brought the scheduled financial deposition, a formal proceeding where Jason would be required to testify under oath regarding the hidden assets and financial structures he had created. Angela had prepared me thoroughly for what to expect, though she cautioned that Jason's increasingly unpredictable behavior made the session difficult to predict. Remember, your role is primarily to observe, she reminded me as we entered the Serre conference room in her firm's downtown offices. The questions will come from the attorneys and the court-appointed financial examiner. Try to maintain a neutral expression regardless of what Jason says. The room was arranged with precision. A long table with court reporter positioned at one end, attorneys for all parties along the sides, the financial examiner at the head. Jason and his attorney were already seated when we entered, and I felt his gaze track me as I moved to my place beside Angela. He looked different, thinner, with shadows beneath his eyes and tension evident in his posture. The polished, confident executive who had maintained multiple lives with apparent ease had been replaced by someone visibly strained by the collapse of his carefully constructed world. Jason attempted to catch my eye several times as the proceedings were organized, but I kept my attention focused on the documents before me, my expression neutral and professional. When Vanessa arrived with her attorney moments later, his attention shifted to her with similar results. No engagement, no emotional connection, just cool professional detachment. The deposition began with the financial examiner outlining the scope of inquiry. Today's proceeding will focus exclusively on the financial structures, accounts, and assets identified through the court-ordered forensic examination. Mr. Mitchell will be questioned under oath regarding the establishment, management, and intended purpose of these financial vehicles. What followed was a methodical dissection of Jason's financial maneuvering over the past decade. The examiner moved chronologically through the creation of shell companies, the establishment of offshore accounts, the diversion of funds from legitimate business activities, and the complex web of transfers designed to obscure the ultimate destination of the assets. Throughout the questioning, Jason attempted to present his actions as sophisticated financial planning rather than deliberate deception. These structures were created for tax efficiency and investment flexibility, he claimed repeatedly. There was never any intent to hide assets from legitimate claim. The financial examiner countered each explanation with documented evidence of concealment, password-protected accounts accessible only by Jason, transfers timed to coincide with periods when I would be occupied with major work projects, documentation, explicitly referencing the need to maintain separation between financial streams. As the questions turned to the Phoenix connection, Jason's composure began to visibly erode. MK Consulting provides legitimate business services, he insisted, his voice tightening. The personal relationship with Ms. Keating developed separately from the professional engagement. Yet the timing of payments to MK Consulting aligns precisely with your personal visits to Phoenix, the examiner noted. And the establishment of the consulting relationship coincided with Ms. Keating's departure from Nexus Technologies and relocation to Arizona, a relocation partially funded through accounts under your exclusive control. Jason's attorney attempted to redirect the questioning, but the examiner persisted. Mr. Mitchell, records indicate that you established a third residential property in Scottsdale approximately 14 months ago. Was Ms. Mitchell aware of this property? Was Ms. Cooper? The Scottsdale property is an investment, Jason insisted, avoiding the direct question. Real estate in that market has shown exceptional growth potential. An investment property, where you've spent 26 nights in the past year, according to credit card records for surrounding purchases, the examiner countered. An investment with no documented connection to either your legitimate business activities or the operations of JV strategic partners. Throughout this exchange, I maintained my neutral expression, though internally I was processing the confirmation of what Thomas had discovered. Jason hadn't merely been making payments to Michelle Keating. He had established a third residence, another parallel life beyond both Portland and Tacoma. When the examiner introduced Vanessa's proposed three-tier approach to asset distribution, Jason's fragile composure finally shattered completely. "This is a coordinated attack," he declared, his voice rising as he gestured toward both Vanessa and me. "They've been communicating behind the scenes, conspiring to maximize their claims while minimizing my access to assets I've built through years of hard work." His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, but Jason shook it off. "I created these wealth structures. I managed these investments. I built these business relationships. And now they're colluding to strip everything away because of personal choices that have nothing to do with financial matters." The examiner remained unmoved by this outburst. "Mr. Mitchell, the court is not concerned with your personal relationships, except insofar as they involve the diversion of marital assets or business funds to which other parties had legitimate claim. The three-tier approach simply acknowledges the different sources of the assets in question." As the deposition continued for another 2 hours, Jason alternated between tightly controlled responses and flashes of indignation. The methodical questioning gradually constructed an undeniable picture of systematic financial deception operating across multiple relationship structures over many years. When the proceedings finally concluded, Jason attempted to approach me directly as we gathered our materials. "Becca, we need to talk privately," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There are aspects of this situation you don't understand." Angela smoothly interposed herself between us. "All communication continues through counsel, Mr. Mitchell. My client has made her position on direct contact quite clear." As we exited the conference room, I caught Vanessa's eye briefly, a moment of unspoken recognition passing between us. Whatever our complicated connection, we had both maintained our boundaries effectively during this crucial proceeding. Outside the building, Angela offered her assessment. That went significantly better than expected from our perspective. Jason's emotional reactions undermined his credibility with the examiner, and his attempts to justify the Phoenix connection only highlighted the pattern of deception. The three-tier approach also gained traction. The examiner seemed receptive to the concept. I nodded agreement, though my thoughts were less focused on the legal strategies and more on the transformation I had witnessed in Jason, the man who had maintained perfect compartmentalization for years, who had navigated multiple lives with apparent ease, had crumbled under the pressure of exposure and accountability. That evening, as I reviewed the deposition transcripts in my townhouse, Thomas called with an update on the Phoenix situation. "I've made contact with Michelle Keating," he reported. "After presenting the evidence we've gathered, she agreed to a confidential conversation." "What did she reveal?" I asked, setting aside the transcripts. "Essentially, confirmation of the pattern we've identified," Thomas replied. Jason approached her approximately 18 months ago with a proposal: relocation to Phoenix, establishment of a consulting business that would receive regular contracts from his network, and a personal relationship that would become his primary focus once he had resolved his existing obligations in Portland and Tacoma. The familiar pattern emerged yet again: Jason creating another parallel life, another set of promises, another future narrative that contradicted his commitments elsewhere. "Did she know about me? About Vanessa and Ethan?" I asked. "She knew he was married," Thomas confirmed. "But he described it as a marriage in name only, maintained for professional appearances." Sound familiar? The exact narrative he had presented to Vanessa about our marriage. Jason hadn't even bothered to create new deceptions. He had simply recycled the same explanations across multiple relationships. "As for Vanessa and Ethan," Thomas continued, "he acknowledged their existence to Keating, but characterized the relationship as a complicated situation resulting from poor choices years ago that he was working to resolve appropriately before making a clean break." Again, the familiar pattern: acknowledging one relationship to the other woman while simultaneously undermining its legitimacy and promising its imminent conclusion. "There's something else," Thomas added. "Keating is 3 months pregnant. Jason is apparently the father." The information should have been shocking, but instead it registered as merely the logical extension of the pattern we had already identified. Of course there would be another child. Of course Jason would be expanding his web of connections and obligations even as he planned to abandon his existing ones. The man operated according to consistent patterns, whatever chaos he created for others. "Does Keating plan to participate in the legal proceedings?" I asked practically. "She's consulting with an attorney about her options," Thomas replied. "Given that she's carrying Jason's child and he provided substantial financial support for her relocation and business establishment, she likely has legitimate claims that would further complicate the asset distribution." After concluding the call, I walked to my balcony and looked out over the Portland skyline, processing this latest revelation. The constellation of Jason's deception kept expanding. Portland, Tacoma, Phoenix, and who knew what other locations might yet be discovered. Lives and promises and financial entanglements multiplying across cities, relationships, and years. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Financial Examiner has scheduled follow-up with additional questions about Phoenix connection. Something new?" I considered how much to share about Keating's pregnancy. While Vanessa and I had established a working communication regarding Ethan, this information would potentially impact her son in ways that required careful consideration. After deliberation, I texted back, "New information confirmed. Significant. Better discussed in person rather than text." Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., usual place." I confirmed the arrangement, then returned to the deposition transcripts, reviewing them with renewed clarity. The financial structures Jason had created weren't merely about hiding assets. They were about maintaining multiple parallel lives while planning eventual escape from all existing commitments. The Cayman Islands transfer wasn't an impulsive reaction to discovery. It was the culmination of years of systematic preparation for eventual disappearance. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized something unexpected. I no longer felt any emotional connection to the man I had been married to for 10 years. The Jason revealed through these investigations was essentially a stranger, someone whose true nature and intentions had been carefully concealed throughout our relationship. Whatever genuine connection might have existed had been severed not by the discovery of his parallel lives, but by the recognition that the person I thought I had married had never actually existed. This realization brought neither sadness nor anger, but a kind of clarity that would prove invaluable in the days ahead as the legal proceedings intensified and Jason's desperate attempts to reassert control grew increasingly unpredictable. I was no longer emotionally entangled with the outcome beyond securing what was rightfully mine. This detachment, This capacity to view the situation with analytical precision rather than emotional reactivity would ultimately prove my greatest asset in navigating what was to come. The court proceedings reached their conclusion on a crisp autumn morning, nearly 6 months after I'd discovered the emptied bank account that had initiated this journey. The final hearing took place in a wood-paneled courtroom downtown, where Jason sat with his attorney at one table while I occupied another with Angela. Vanessa and her counsel were positioned at a third table, a visual representation of the triangulated conflict our lives had become. Judge Eleanor Winters presided with the measured authority of someone who had seen countless divorces, but still recognized the uniqueness of each situation. She began by acknowledging the unusual circumstances. This court has reviewed extensive documentation regarding the financial structures created by Mr. Mitchell across multiple households and jurisdictions, she stated, her tone matter of fact. We have also considered the depositions from all parties, including Ms. Keating's recent testimony regarding the Phoenix property and her current pregnancy. I maintained my composed expression as the judge continued, though I noted Jason shifting uncomfortably at the mention of Michelle Keating. Her appearance at the previous hearing had clearly unsettled him, another compartment of his life collapsing into the others, another carefully maintained narrative destroyed. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, I am prepared to issue my ruling on the distribution of assets and the dissolution of the marriage between Rebecca and Jason Mitchell. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Winters methodically outlined her decision. The three-tier approach Vanessa had proposed had indeed formed the foundation of the final judgment, with assets allocated based on their origination and intended purpose rather than treated as a single pool. The funds derived from Mr. Mitchell's legitimate employment in Portland and the joint accounts established during the marriage will be divided according to standard community property principles, the judge explained. Ms. Mitchell is awarded 60% of these assets in consideration of her documented contributions to the household and the deliberate attempts by Mr. Mitchell to divert these resources. She turned to the second category. Assets generated through JV strategic partners, including business accounts and properties purchased with those funds, will be primarily allocated toward the support of Ethan Mitchell, with administration rights granted to Ms. Cooper as the primary custodial parent. Finally, she addressed the most contentious portion. As for the funds Mr. Mitchell attempted to transfer to the Cayman Islands and the assets associated with the Phoenix property, these will be divided equally between Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Cooper for Ethan's benefit, and a reserve for the support of Ms. Keating's unborn child. Mr. Mitchell's access to these funds will be restricted to court-approved expenditures until all financial obligations to his children are satisfied. Jason leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney, who raised a hand to address the court. Your Honor, my client objects to the restriction of his access to these funds. He has legitimate business interests that require financial flexibility. Judge Winters was unmoved. Mr. Mitchell has demonstrated a pattern of using business interests as cover for diverting assets away from his legal obligations. The court finds these restrictions necessary and appropriate, given the documented history of financial concealment. As the judge continued with additional details of the judgment, I felt a curious sense of detachment. The numbers being discussed, millions of dollars in total, seemed almost abstract, divorced from emotional significance. What mattered wasn't the amounts, but the principle. Jason's elaborate deception had been methodically unraveled, examined, and addressed through proper legal channels. When the formal proceedings concluded, I gathered my documents while steadfastly avoiding Jason's attempts to make eye contact across the courtroom. Angela guided me toward the exit, but Jason maneuvered to intercept us in the hallway. Becca, please, he began, stepping directly into our path. Now that it's over, we need to talk. There are things I want to explain. Angela started to intervene, but I gently indicated that I could handle the situation. After 6 months of maintaining strict boundaries, I was curious what Jason might say now that his elaborate schemes had been fully exposed and legally addressed. "What exactly do you want to explain, Jason?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "The secret families? The hidden accounts? The elaborate lies you maintained for years? Or perhaps your plans to abandon everyone and disappear to the Caymans?" His expression shifted between contrition and calculation. The performance of remorse coupled with the strategic assessment I now recognized as his default mode of interaction. "It wasn't what you think," he insisted, lowering his voice as other court participants passed us in the hallway. "Things got complicated and I made mistakes trying to manage impossible situations. But I never stopped caring about you." I studied him with clinical detachment, noting how the familiar phrases that might once have affected me now registered as merely predictable tactics. Caring doesn't manifest as systematic deception, Jason. It doesn't express itself through emptying joint accounts or planning secret escapes. "I was going to make it right," he claimed, desperation edging into his voice. "The Cayman arrangement was temporary, just until I could sort everything out properly. By abandoning 3 separate families?" I clarified, watching his expression flicker as he registered that I knew about Michelle's pregnancy. "That's not making things right. That's escaping consequences." Before he could respond, Vanessa emerged from the courtroom with her attorney. She paused briefly upon seeing us, then approached with confident strides. "Rebecca, do you have a moment before you leave?" she asked, deliberately ignoring Jason. "Of course," I replied, grateful for the interruption. Jason looked between us, visibly unsettled by our cordial interaction. "You two can't seriously be friends now," he remarked incredulously. Vanessa regarded him coolly. "What we are is none of your concern. We've simply learned that direct communication serves Ethan's interests better than filtering everything through the chaos you created." Without waiting for his response, she guided me a few steps away, effectively dismissing him from the conversation. Angela remained nearby, maintaining professional oversight while allowing us to speak. "I wanted to thank you," Vanessa said quietly. "Your approach throughout this process, particularly regarding Ethan, has shown remarkable grace under circumstances where bitterness would have been entirely justified. Ethan deserves stability and support regardless of his parents' choices," I replied simply. "Penalizing a child for adult deceptions would solve nothing." She nodded agreement. "I've been thinking about the future, specifically about the educational trust the court established for Ethan. When he's older, I want him to understand that this provision came not from court mandates alone, but from your willingness to prioritize his needs despite having every reason to feel otherwise." Her proposition touched me unexpectedly. Throughout the legal proceedings, I had maintained emotional distance, approaching each decision with analytical precision rather than personal investment. Yet here was a reminder that behind the legal framework and financial calculations were human lives being reshaped by these decisions. "I appreciate that," I acknowledged. "When the time is right, of course." As we concluded our conversation, I noticed Jason watching us from across the hallway, his expression a mixture of confusion and calculation, a man witnessing an alliance he hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. Outside the courthouse, autumn leaves swirled across the steps as I descended into the bright October morning. Angela walked beside me, our professional relationship now tinged with the camaraderie that comes from navigating complex challenges together. "6 months ago, when you first came to my office, would you have imagined this outcome?" she asked, as we reached the sidewalk. I considered the question carefully. Not the specifics, certainly. The multiple households, the Phoenix connection, the pregnancy, those were beyond what anyone could have predicted. But the fundamental dynamic, Jason's deception being methodically exposed and addressed, that feels almost inevitable in retrospect. Angela nodded thoughtfully. Most people in your situation become consumed by the emotional betrayal. They make decisions reactively, often to their own detriment. Your analytical approach throughout this process was unusual and remarkably effective. Financial analysis is my profession, I replied simply, identifying patterns, tracking inconsistencies, building comprehensive models of complex situations. These are skills I've developed over years. I simply applied them to my personal circumstances. As we parted ways at the corner, Angela with a final case folder tucked under her arm, me with the court judgment securing my financial future, I felt a sense of completion rather than triumph. The legal battle had concluded not with emotional catharsis, but with structural resolution. Assets appropriately distributed, obligations established, boundaries defined. I walked several blocks to the riverfront park where I often came to think. The Willamette flowed steadily below, its surface reflecting the autumn colors from trees lining its banks. Finding an empty bench overlooking the water, I sat and pulled out my phone to check messages from work. My team had maintained operations smoothly during my absence for the final hearing, with only a few questions requiring my attention. As I responded to these messages, I noticed a family passing by, parents walking hand in hand while their young daughter skipped ahead, occasionally stopping to examine a particularly interesting leaf. They moved with the easy synchronicity of people whose lives were genuinely intertwined, whose daily patterns reinforced rather than undermined their connections. The sight prompted reflection on what I had actually lost through this ordeal. Not the husband I thought I had. That person had never truly existed. Not financial security. My own careful planning had ensured that long before I discovered Jason's deception. Not even trust in relationships generally. My connections with colleagues, with Angela, and even the unusual alliance with Vanessa had demonstrated that authentic interactions remained possible. What I had lost, perhaps, was a certain narrative about my life, the story I had believed about my marriage, my future, the path I was traveling. That narrative had been revealed as fiction, requiring me to write a new story more firmly grounded in reality. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Heard the judgment came through. Dinner to celebrate? The team would love to toast your new beginning. The invitation represented exactly that, a new beginning rather than merely an ending. Professional colleagues who had become friends. A career that continued to flourish despite personal upheaval. A future shaped by my choices, rather than Jason's deceptions. I texted back my acceptance, then stood to continue my walk along the river. The funds Jason had taken from our joint account, the $47,000 that had triggered this entire process, now seemed almost trivial compared to the millions ultimately addressed through the court's judgment. Yet that initial discovery had been the essential catalyst, exposing the elaborate deception that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. As I walked, I remembered something my grandmother had told me years ago when teaching me about saving money. It's not about the amounts, Becca, it's about the habits. Small decisions compound over time, for better or worse. How true that had proven, though not in ways she could have anticipated. Jason's habit of deception had compounded over years into an elaborate structure of lies. My habit of careful, financial management had compounded into security he couldn't undermine. Small decisions, accumulating into life-altering consequences. I reached the pedestrian bridge crossing the river and paused midway to watch the water flowing beneath. Rivers always appeared different on the surface than they were beneath. Currents moving in unexpected directions, depths concealing entire ecosystems invisible from shore. For 10 years, I'd seen only the surface of my marriage, unaware of the currents moving underneath. Now, standing in the autumn sunshine with clear vision and secure footing, I faced the currents of my life directly, no longer deceived by appearances, no longer vulnerable to hidden diversions. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would meet them with the same analytical clarity and quiet strength that had guided me through these turbulent months. The bank account Jason had emptied was just one of many he had hidden. But my inner resources, the ones he had never recognized or valued, had proven far more substantial than any financial asset. Those resources remained not just intact, but strengthened through this journey, compounding into a foundation for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.